morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon to where you are. I'm speaking to you from not quite so sunny Sandbach in Cheshire in the UK. If you can see the picture of me in a thick red woolen jumper with some green grass behind. That green grass is literally just outside of my window. It's 7 o'clock here in the morning for me, so it hasn't decided what kind of day it's going to be. The information that you have about me there, just to say that I'm very much involved in Agile of all flavours and in business analysis from a traditional point of view via the BCS qualifications, which I was also involved in the founding of many years ago now. And for Agile project management and Agile business analysis, I've been involved in the setup of those. So I'm looking at business analysis today from an Agile perspective, but I can make comments about the more traditional perspective of that if anyone needs that to be the case. Let's move on a little. The reason for the webinar, obviously Agile now is mainstream. I think most organisations are either doing it, considering it, or have been doing it for some time. The issue really with the business analyst, most Agile approaches don't take a view that we look at particular roles, which is fine. They take a view that we look at skills. However, business analysis skills sit within a team, a solution development team, and they also have to sit outside of that and keep an eye on the business and the strategy that's there around the change that we're doing. So most approaches wouldn't consider it their business to try and actually give a particular role perspective on this. However, a lot of people, probably a lot of you on the call, are business analysts, have been business analysts, and there's that need for some guidance to see where this fits in, to see where the business analysis role and skills actually fit into an Agile environment. As I go through, I'll give you a little bit of background to what the guidance, the handbook of guidance actually covers, and I'll pick up at the end of the talk on what certifications are available for this via the APM Group International, the APMG International, and I think Michael right at the end will give you a little more detail about the specifics of that. So moving on. I probably won't talk for a full hour, I hope. I'll try and leave you a little bit of time at the end for questions to me and also questions to DDLS. So how's Agile business analysis different from traditional business analysis? What the guidance actually contains in overview, and then what certifications are available. Okay, so the view is that business analysis skills are still needed, which in fact, of course they are, to make sure that whatever change we do, and however rapidly we're doing that, we're keeping a view on what the business strategy is and what value we need from this particular set of changes. So keeping a focus on the benefits to justify the expenditure, and the business analyst role can actually keep that focus by looking at appropriate cost-effective solutions in relation to the business strategy. So very much a focus on value and a focus on the customer's perspective. Now, of course, within Agile, we are trying to keep the customer involved and involved with the developers and the solution development team. But this is really so that there is an end-to-end overview, not of this specific change only, but of where this fits into the organisation's corporate strategy. And we've listed here just a few of the skills that you might recognise, things like looking at strategic analysis, modelling the business capability via a conceptual model of what is it we're trying to achieve, what do we need to be good at, looking at the value chain across the end-to-end piece of the organisation, and looking at skills, looking at competencies, processes and data, facilitation, which is a key skill for the business analyst, requirements engineering, not rather than just requirements capture, to make sure that we fully understand those requirements, and looking at the solutions that actually fit for the business and are cost effective. So if I were asked, I'd say business analysis is about three things. It's about increasing the speed and frequency of delivering value. So it's about those incremental deliveries, but very value focused. It's about, let's see if we can get this slide to advance. Apparently it's only about one thing. It'll be about three things if I can get this to move on. Yeah, let's see if that works. Yeah, there we are. So it's about value, it's about collaboration, and it's about empowerment of the team. And one of the differences that you will see, as I talk about those later on, is that it's collaboration of a team, which is all of the skills that we need. It's a poly-skilled team to develop a solution. Within that team, we would expect customer end-user representation and availability, and the business analyst not as a block or a go-between between the customer and the development skills, but actually enabling and empowering those. So that's the second thing, the collaboration and empowerment. It's also, within Agile, very much a focus on feedback and learning. Those frequent deliveries not only deliver value, but give us the feedback, which will hopefully improve what we're going to do for the future releases. And the book of guidance published by the Bsdm Consortium and the certifications in conjunction with the APMG International is an A4, 1-inch thick book, so there's plenty of guidance in there. And this actually takes the DSDM approach, but adds in more guidance very specifically for business analysis. Notice that the title is not the business analyst, but business analysis techniques. So these can be used for wider than just the business analyst. And this schematic really actually shows you what the chapters are within the book. We look at the fundamentals of Agile, then we start picking up on some familiar areas to a traditional business analyst, but with an Agile twist, and some other aspects which are very Agile in their nature. So business analysis of the business case, looking at the stakeholders, looking at requirements from the perspective of user stories, very much used in many Agile approaches, prioritization, and we add a little into that over and above. Oh, excuse me, this might be happening. Okay, sorry about that. As long as it wasn't you trying to get me, that'll be fine. So facilitated workshops, we put a lot of detail into techniques that the business analyst would need for modelling and for prototyping. And time boxing, iterative development is very much bringing in the Agile way of working, planning the requirements throughout the life cycle and the evolution of those. The requirements life cycle as it fits into an Agile project, and then a final bit on transitioning towards being a business analyst. We're very much looking at the Agile manifesto, as all Agile approaches, of course, do, and keeping in mind those values of individuals and interactions, collaboration, in other words, over processes and tools. Not that we don't need processes and tools, but very much that focus on let's get the right collaboration. Let's get some working software out there regularly and take the feedback related to that. Customer collaboration and having the partnership with our customers, customer-supplier partnership, and responding to change, so regular planning and replanning. The structure of DSDM as it stands, without the Agile BA guidance on top of it, is what underpins this certification. It has an overall philosophy, a set of 8 principles, and then it focuses in on a process, a framework to work within, people and roles, products to keep us under control during the process, and the practices and techniques. And we flesh out a lot about the particular role of the business analyst and the practices in the guidance. And of course, always underpinned by common sense, as this approach, and here the Agile approach really should be. But the reason for choosing DSDM in particular over something like Scrum is not that you couldn't work within Scrum within your solution development team and have DSDM as a framework, which is definitely a case, but no other approach actually really addresses the business analyst role and that position between the solution development team and the governance levels, sponsorship levels that need to be there if we're working within a project. Still focusing in, as DSDM itself always does, on relying on getting on-time delivery, within cost delivery, and retaining the quality. And the features then are prioritised and delivered as appropriate, business value focused on delivery of those. And the philosophy of DSDM, underpinning what we're doing, that best business value emerges when we do align our projects to clear business goals. We have this frequent delivery and we have the collaboration of the right skilled people. And a refresher for anyone who's seen DSDM before, the 8 principles that underpin it. You can see the focus in there on deliveries and on the business need, collaboration, holding the quality, never compromise quality, building incrementally, but getting a firm foundation up front. And that's going to be something that the business analyst is very much involved in, getting the high level but clear statement of what the requirements are. Think of them as what rather than how. Think of them as headlines, but clear enough so that we've got a framework within which to work as we move forward within the project. But then developing iteratively and allowing that change and that extra understanding and elaboration of requirements. Communicating throughout, and the business analyst facilitating that communication between all of the necessary skills and the customer and user side. And the control really working within time boxes is also fleshed out a little more for the business analyst. And then the DSDM framework. The standard framework is there, but with the fleshing out of what kind of requirements and what kind of business analysis work there is at each of the phases. So pre-project, what do we need to know in our terms of reference? Feasibility, what level of requirement is needed to be stated there, and typically objectives and themes, and there would be the very high level epic for what we're trying to do, epic story, and then getting into foundations, again the prioritized requirements expressed as high level epics and user stories within that. And then in evolutionary development, that's where the requirements would be fleshed out. Of course, when we get into deployment, the business analyst very much involved in there with their understanding of the current as-is situation and having laid out the future to be situation, they would have a lot to offer in there. And here we have a schematic just laying that life cycle out as a timeline and showing the elements that are there from a business analyst perspective, and within the feasibility study and outline business case, there's some guidance in the handbook on that, guidance on stakeholders, and the idea of prototyping as show and tell as we go through. Prioritise high-level requirements at the end of foundations, which are going to evolve, but it's giving a high-level set of headlines, effectively, for what we're going to do, and at least for the first increment, something on which time boxes can be planned. The full business case, project stakeholders, and wider stakeholders, again, have been analysed. We look at the DSDM product overview, And notice the orange bars towards the top of this, flowing throughout the life cycle, from terms of reference in pre-project through feasibility and foundations, right through to deployment and benefits assessment. Business analysts very much engaged in those, and the guidance picks up on the business case, the prioritised requirements list, and within the green cycle of solution development, some techniques for the models and the prototypes that are within there. And then the 5 key practices of DSDM, which stay the same: workshops, prioritisation, modelling, iterative development, and time boxing, looking at all of those, but giving some fleshing out, especially in the middle ones, prioritisation. We had some more prioritisation detail and techniques. Modelling, a lot of new techniques presented there. Iterative development and time boxing, looking at the working there. And another look at some of the Agile workshops and a few of the extra ones that might be things that the business analyst would be engaged in. So we're all familiar with Moscow, I think, where we look at the features in terms of what must we have, what are the things we should have, but they're not real complete showstoppers, but we are trying to include those. What are the things we could have? These would add business benefit, but that's where our flexibility and our contingency will lie if our time is being threatened, and a clear statement of what we won't have this time. That's familiar to all DSDMers already. However, we do add in a little more and talk about particularly Kano prioritization, classifying prioritization from the customer's needs and customer perception point of view, looking at the things that we actually really must have in there, the things that we will have to have, otherwise the customer will not accept this product. Added on to that, some of the things that we would want, things that the customer would want and would be disappointed without. And then from a customer point of view, what are those things that would actually wow them? What are the real attractors? There are also things to watch out for, which are the indifferent things that we may add in, but the customer really doesn't care about them. And what are the things that some customers like, but others would be dissatisfied by? And the business analyst can bring a prioritization and a negotiation aspect to that, making sure that we don't build in things that actually will turn off some of the customers. Working always very much with the business on all of those prioritizations. Then this slide just gives you a scatter of the key additions that we now have within the guidance. User stories, mapping those user stories so we can see the links between them. Business processes, particularly looked at through swim lanes. A business domain model looking at the data and the structure of entities within the areas of the particular change that we're doing. Techniques like looking at the customer journey. A reminder of getting a context diagram for the big picture. Agile techniques like specification by giving an example, by working through it, a prototyping approach, and impact mapping, looking at value, looking at why we're doing things. And the link into use cases, which very often people will use to support their user stories and to give some structure to that. So all of those are fleshed out within the handbook. That's inside the project. We also look beyond, before, and outside of the project, making sure that we get the business case right. So a lightweight business case in a lean canvas, the idea of the product vision box. What is this piece that we're doing? How would we describe it to the customer? Balanced business scorecard, a traditional approach, as are SWOT, MOST, PESTLE, and Porter's 5 forces, but again looked at from an Agile perspective, the same techniques and the way that they would give guidance to the project. Looking at the value chain across the end-to-end as well, and some measurement techniques, looking at doing a resource audit, looking at McKinsey's 7S model to see what aspects of a business we need to take account of. So those are all fairly traditional techniques. I didn't mention TOES, a look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, the SWOT, but looking at how we might bring out the strategy and what we actually do on those. So quite a lot of additional focus, but in particular that additional focus of taking the Agile changes that are going to be made and the solution development team, but having someone who has, which is a business analyst, has the view of the organisation as a whole, its overall people, processes and technology, keeping that holistic view where we might be working in a project and at a tactical level of how it links into an overall program of work that we're working within, which is strategically focused on the organisation's mission and objectives. So it's the BA that actually has that end-to-end view. Whatever other departments or areas in the organisation are being focused on by the Agile project or by the Agile work, the BA has techniques and has the position to keep that end-to-end process in view and keep management's strategic needs in view also. Taking the change from as is, where we are now, and with techniques to actually map what that is, when it's happening, where, how, and who's doing it and why we're doing it, and mapping that across via the loop down through the conceptual focus on what are we trying to achieve, why are we doing this, and bringing it back to the future system, the future state in the to be. Still looking at something that traditional business analysts would always be trying to do, which is not only eliciting the requirement in the first place, managing it throughout, doing an appropriate level of documentation, validating it, making sure that each requirement is testable and has its acceptance criteria, and throughout analysing further to understand the way that requirements relate to each other, what the dependencies are, etc. So still doing those things, but doing them in an agile way in that we don't take the requirements down to a detailed level all up front. We get the right level of detail at the end of feasibility to know what we are looking at doing, at the end of foundations to be able to make some sensible estimates, at least for the first increment, and then during the elaboration that we do during exploration later on, we actually then are getting the detail of the requirements, time box by time box, just in time. And the Agile BA handbook, as you see there, available from the APMG International and from the Bsdm Consortium, should you need that. Usually given out on the training courses as well, because that's what underpins the certifications. And that handbook has sufficient guidance for both foundation and practitioner level certifications. So just a few words about the certification. Foundation exams have been available since last year, since June, and the practitioner exam just recently launched in April this year. And these are a complement to the already existing Agile project management certifications. Obviously a level of overlap in that Bsdm underpins both. However, a lot of new techniques here for the business analyst specifically. And our target audience, yes, of course, business analysts and people who've been business analysts in a traditional world will find a lot of value in this. People who are going to be business analysts in an agile world and haven't been there in a traditional business analyst role will actually gain some sensible techniques to actually use to help them in that job. Project managers often have to do a business analysis role, I've found, and they will benefit from this. And agile developers may be being asked to have analysis skills within the team. Again, frequently that would be the case, and they would gain from it. And then other roles, change analysts, systems analysts, Scrum product owners especially, okay, and the higher level of product manager that sometimes comes in across several products. Again, many of these techniques are exactly the sort of thing that they need to work with. Foundation exam is a multiple choice, straightforward multiple choice, one statement, 4 options, one of them's correct. It's a 45-minute exam with 50 questions, and it's 50% to pass. No distinctions, no extra badges. It's a closed book exam, although based on the Agile BA handbook, and that is a prerequisite to doing the practitioner exam, which the practitioner exam is much more of a knowledge and understanding based exam, so multiple choice, but more comprehension style questions that actually dig into your understanding of how these techniques will actually give value. It's 4 questions, 20 marks each question, so out of 80 marks, 150 minutes duration, and you are able to have the Agile BA handbook as your support. There isn't any extra reading time in there, but there is a scenario there on which all the questions are based. 50% is required to pass, or if you wanted to, sort of really storm in there and become a trainer, then slightly higher marks, 66% is what's required for that, plus some business analysis experience. That's also, of course, an absolute given. So the practitioner exam is this 2.5-hour exam and much more comprehension based on a scenario. For those who like to get into such things, the syllabus areas for both foundation and practitioner have 4 categories in them. Business analysis fundamentals, and that would include Agile fundamentals, strategy and organizational aspects and techniques, the practices used at both outside of the team, strategic level, and inside the team, and quite a good chunk on requirements. And from the chapters, all but chapter 12 are examinable. Chapter 12 is the how do you transition, which is much more of a personal transitioning, so that isn't examined, but all other chapters are. And the qualification should then give you the tools and techniques and approaches to actually do business analysis in an Agile world. And this actually is the only framework anywhere that gives you this comprehensive guidance and qualifications for an Agile business analyst. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. I think we're in a position now where I'd be happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you for that, Dot. That was a great presentation. We actually do have a few questions that the audience have actually asked. So the first question we actually have is from Jane. So the question is, why should people get Agile BA certified? And at what stage should they be getting certified? Is it at the beginning of one's career?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you said it was from Jane, yeah?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, hi Jane. Yeah, why should a business analyst get certified? Many of them feel they already are. Or certifiable is that. Yeah, it's one of those things that it is a great credibility giver. Over the time that I've been involved with business analysis, I've had business analysts who said it seems very hard to justify their position in a project. People don't understand what they do. This helps to define the role that they do and say, you know, there is a lot here, and it's a lot that really does give value. Each of the techniques individually that they will bring in are very easily shown to be giving value. And I think having the certification just makes it professionalizes the role of the business analyst, as well as I think certification does tend to drive learning. So if you know you've got to go for an exam, then you will focus in and you'll learn the techniques. So I think it's twofold. It's credibility, and it's also going to give people, you know, a bit of an incentive to learn these techniques. When should you do it? Which point of the career? It's probably helpful if when you go for Agile business analysis, you have some level of knowledge of what a business analyst is meant to do. The courses it's only a 4-day course, but with 2 exams typically. It sometimes is done as a 5-day course, but even so, it isn't sufficient to teach the in-depth of some of the techniques. It isn't intended to do that. So a bit of reading beforehand, especially about some of the more traditional techniques, like the Porter's 5 forces and so forth, would actually help a business analyst. So I wouldn't advise somebody to come into it, sort of absolutely completely raw without any background reading or preparation. However, we do get people coming from Agile approaches in towards business analysis, as well as traditional business analysts going towards Agile. I hope that, does that help to answer the question?
That sounds great, Todd. Jane, I hope that answers your question. Todd, I've actually got another, well, it's a comment and also a question in one. So Tracy said, thanks for the presentation. She's really enjoying it.
Yeah, thank you.
But you actually mentioned that DSDM must retain a focus on quality. Practically speaking, how can the BA contribute to that?
Okay, I would like to think any approach that we're doing to bringing in business change wants to focus on quality. DSDM very much keeps the quality by emphasizing the fact that we can't do everything. It's that triangle. We can't necessarily do everything in the time that we've got. New things tend to come along as well. So once we've estimated the work we're watching in Agile for the world around us changing, new things come along. If we just pushed everything in, the thing that would get squeezed is the quality. Now, DSDM and via the Agile Business Analyst, this focus can be kept. DSDM very much keeps that focus on quality, on time, on budget, but keeping the quality by prioritizing the requirements appropriately with the right business involvement, with business visionary for the overview, with business ambassador within the solution development team. And the business analyst will facilitate the communications between these roles and the rest of the team, not getting in between. I think I kind of emphasised, but being a sort of facilitator watching to make sure those discussions are going on. So very much we keep the quality by ensuring that there is that prioritisation.
Thank you, Dot. That was fantastic.
That answers Tracy's question.
We've actually got a few more questions coming in at the moment. So one came from Ayed, and the question is, can I get a job as a business analyst if I do this course? I come from a technical background, but I would love to transition to a BA role.
Right. I'll pick up on Ayed's question then. So can you get a job as a business analyst, having come from the technical role and done this certification? The answer is that this certification, if you did the training, got through the foundation and practitioner exams, would give you a lot of credibility. Okay, so I think businesses are looking very much for not only business analysts, but Agile business analysts, and I think it would give you the credibility to actually go for those jobs. There may be other features that employers are looking for, but certainly I think this would give you that cachet that you've got Agile business analysis under your belt. And of course, with the practitioner being pretty new, there are not many of them yet out there.
Ayed, I hope that answers your question. Wow, we've actually got a few more questions coming in. So one comes from Jonathan, and he says, how can we know what is the right level of oversight approval process for these Agile initiatives? Up until now, it's very lengthy and bureaucratic process has been required, and we would like to change that for a number of reasons. Just not sure how far to go. Any tips on that?
Right, okay. I mean, very often in a traditional world, we've had very serious sign-off points within the life cycle that we're working in. Agile doesn't prevent that happening. It's still, and DSDM very much has a structure whereby if we do need wider approvals and sign-offs, we can do that at the end of feasibility, we can do that at the end of foundations, we can actually do it time box by time box throughout the main body of the project that we're working on. So there are the marker points, and I think the real and only difference is that we are looking at a higher level statement of requirements, particularly at foundations, before we launch into getting into the detail. So the detail comes out as we go through the life cycle. But I think the sort of the oversight and approval process can very much be built in, and that becomes something which is built in throughout the life cycle of the change that we're doing. Hope that answers the question.
Jonathan, I hope that answers your question. I've got another one from Louise that came through. She's read an article about Agile business analyst by Carl Weiners. In the article, he states that the project is Agile, but the role of a BA remains the same. Perhaps some changes in the requirement gathering and documentation. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, I think it's a little dangerous to say it remains the same, but it is broadly, of course, the same things need to happen across the life cycle. I think the key things that the business analyst does that are different in an Agile world, for me, is they are not a go-between who collects the business requirements and then acts as a gatekeeper to go into a sort of traditional development. Very much I'm seeing the business analyst as an enabler of discussions, especially at the detailed level, between the user and the customer community and the solution development team. So while we still need to gather requirements and have a statement, albeit a higher level statement at the end of foundations with our prioritized requirements list, which a lot of Agile approaches call a product backlog. At that point, we've got a list of headlines that we're going to deal with, which will be taken into the time boxes. Within a time box, I would see business analysis skills brought in by a business analyst, customer skills brought in by a business ambassador, development skills, we have solution developer, and we have testing skills, solution tester within that solution development team. I'm actually looking mentally at the Bsdm roles model when I talk about that. And while those roles are not siloed roles, and we can have a sharing of skills, also it's not a discussion that's a passing off, a handing off of one role to another, analyst to designer, designer to developer, for example. So the real difference there is the business analyst encouraging the collaborative environment between other team roles and not any kind of handoff of they do the work and then developers speak to them rather than the customer, not that.
There's some really good questions coming through, isn't it, Don?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are exactly what we need. This is great. And if anyone has a supplementary or follow-up question within the time we have, then please do come forward with those.
Fantastic. I do have another one that just came through. When a BA takes high-level requirements at first level, how does architecture design impact when we get into details for time box?
Could you repeat the question again? Sorry, I
sure.
Just asked us a bit of that.
So when a BA takes high-level requirements at the first level, how does architecture design impact when we get into more of the details when we're doing time boxing?
Okay, that is a really good question. Architectural design in Agile is an evolving thing, as all aspects are. However, at the end of foundations, we are looking very much to get a high-level statement of what that architectural design is, what framework we're working on. So we would have that architectural design laid out as a kind of blueprint floor plan, if you were thinking of a house. So that's high level too, but enough as a guiding framework for any architectural design detail that comes out later. Now, at the end of foundations too, we also have the high level statements of requirements in a prioritized requirements list. They are very what rather than how. So we're not trying to look at describing specific solution at that point. So that keeps it a little separate from the architecture. And as the architecture evolves, we have the flexibility of bringing in the exactly how we do things, time box by time box. So the two things, architectural design and requirements, are emerging together at a high level by the end of foundations, both giving us a skeleton framework for every detail that we flesh out later on. The right requirements as what, and the architectural design as the very high level how at the end of foundations.
That's great, Dot. Thank you for that. The questions that keep on rolling in. So here we go. There's another question from Doug. Which documentation doesn't get written on an Agile project? Business requirement details, solution design details, solution implementation details, or other? How is this justified?
Right, okay, so Doug, was it?
Yes.
Good question. The only documentation that you require on an Agile project is what is useful, which might be all the documentation that you had previously, and if it were that, it's spaced out so that you're not producing it all up front. Typically, we don't need quite so much documentation on the detail because time box by time box, the team are working together each time on a small piece, and some of the things that would have had to have been documented up front to be handed off to be dealt with a long time later by developers, some of that documentation may be able to be dealt with as the developer is actually developing developing the screen, developing a piece of the solution with the business analyst and with the tester and with the business ambassador around them. So it isn't really what we don't do, it's when we don't do it. It ain't what you don't do, it's the way you don't do it. It's very much that at foundations we're trying to keep a level high enough so that we've left the real detail to the time boxes, because if things change later on in the time boxes, if we did the detail up front, we actually would have done a lot of wasted work, and we're trying to avoid that. However, what we are trying to do at foundations is state enough so that we understand the requirement and we understand well enough to plan and put those into time boxes. So the documentation about the requirements of foundations needs to be sufficient for understanding. And as we always say with user stories, a user story is always a marker point for a conversation later. So some of that conversation may not need to be documented. It may or it may not.
But
very much, I was going to say in summary to that, very much we're looking to see what documentation is actually needed and doing that and doing it just in time. Okay, and where we don't need the documentation, let's not do it. Where the documentation is just a handoff, let's look at that. We don't really need to be doing those handoffs. We need to be doing conversations and discussions.
So Jonathan asks, so does that mean that the final ongoing documentation of the solution takes place instead of the initial detailed requirements?
If I understand Jonathan's question correctly, I think the answer is yes. The documentation is an ongoing thing throughout the evolutionary development to the level that's needed. Doesn't mean to say we need to write down everything we always did before just because we always did before. It's very much questioning how much we need and documenting just enough, but not insufficient, just enough and just in time.
Thank you for that, Dot. I think we've got one last question here, and that one comes from Ashley. So Ashley says, hi Dot, thanks for the presentation. It gives us a great overview of Agile BA. I'd like to ask how you manage time boxes and iteration so that project closes succinctly and without slowly fading into nothing and failing to deliver lower priority requirements.
Okay, now this is something that Bsdm has a very specific approach on what we're delivering time box by time box. It isn't the attitude to Agile of this is an ongoing forever change, although we can use Bsdm where we have got ongoing changes and a team that are allocated. Very much Bsdm's focus is this is a project, we will take it increment by increment, and we will take each increment as being a series of time boxes where we are putting a specific amount from the prioritised requirements list into each of those time boxes. So each time box is clearly stated. Within each time box, we can see some flexibility of must have, should have, could have, and we will be able to see time box by time box how we are delivering and what's being delivered. So there isn't this danger of it, just going on and fading into nothing, or, just getting to a point where we just, and the next time box and the next one. So DSDM itself gives that control, and the business analyst can help by being that person who really keeps everyone's focus on prioritising what do we need and what do we need early and what are the things that we don't need quite so much. Under the business's prioritisation, always not the business analyst's own, but business analysts can keep pulling everyone back to what are we trying to achieve, what's our focus.
Thank you so much for that, Jod. That was a very informative session. I think that's all of the questions we actually have today. But before we actually leave this session, we do have a short poll on tonight's webinar, and your insights will actually help us shape the futures of future events. We will also send you a link of the recording of the event in the next few days, and also a copy of the presentation. But before we head off today, what I'll do is I'll open up the presentation to Michael so that he can talk to us about the upcoming courses. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Beck. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Now, I'm not sure whether I have...
I might move it for you. Yep.
That'd be great. So just a quick thank you very much, Dot, for your time, and it's been a pleasure. It's very rare that we when we run a webinar that we actually get to someone to host the person who literally wrote the book. So it's actually given our attendees a very good insight into exactly what to expect when they come in our courses. And it was great to see, you outline the differences between a traditional BA versus an Agile BA, what those key components of the course would be, and also what we've seen separate to what you've talked about is that the popularity growth of Agile is reminiscent. I've been in training for a very long time, and the popularity growth curve that we're seeing with Agile is reminiscent of ITIL back in the early days. So, if anyone's thinking about looking at this course, we definitely suggest that you seriously consider it, because it's globally recognised and it gives you, I guess, the credibility when you walk into whether it's a job interview or a project, or when you're dealing with stakeholders, they're going to know that they're dealing with an Agile BA. So without further ado, I just want to quickly touch on the two courses that you can sit. The first one is the Agile Business Foundation course, which is 3 days. That obviously, as the name suggests on the box, talks about all of the topologies and the methodologies around the framework. And the second course is the practitioner, which is a fairly intense, full 1-day practitioner. Both of those courses, if you can imagine, the foundation course includes the exam at the end of that those 3 days, and the practitioner also includes the exam at the end of that 4th day. At the moment, we have the following dates. All of these dates can be found on our website. If you just jump on ddls.com.au, click on the Business Analysis tab, and you can see all those dates for your relevant state. We've got, as you can see, we've got dates in Brisbane, Sydney and Perth. Please, we're actually in the process of populating some dates for Canberra, Adelaide and Melbourne in the next week. So please check back with us, or conversely, alternatively, speak with your DDLS account manager and let them know, and we'll start collating a wish list for customers on when we can post these dates.